Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed without feeling completely buried under that mountain of information we all face. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into a part of the Bible that, well, often gets overlooked, maybe even seems a bit daunting, the books of 1 and 2 Chronicles. Many might think of them as, just dense lists of names or maybe a simple retelling of stories we already know from Samuel and Kings. But what if I told you these books are far, far more than that? What if they hold some surprising keys, actually, to understanding identity, purpose, and hope, especially for people feeling disconnected or overwhelmed by history, ours or theirs?
Indeed.
Yeah,
You're really about to discover a treasure trove of insight. It's meticulously crafted, for a specific audience at a really pivotal moment in their history. Our mission for this deep dive is to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, understand the chronicler's unique perspective, and see how these ancient texts offer, well, surprising clarity and profound relevance, really, for anyone grappling with their roots, their legacy, or maybe the weight of their own history. So yeah, get ready for some serious aha moments, because Chronicles is like a masterclass in reinterpreting the past to illuminate the future.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Many of us are probably familiar with the books of Samuel and Kings, right? They cover a lot of the same historical narrative. So the natural question is, why do we even need Chronicles? What's the big picture here? What makes these books fundamentally different from just, a historical rerun?
That's a crucial question. And the answer is that Chronicles isn't just a repetition. It's a reinterpretation with a very specific agenda. Actually, the way the books were named gives us a clue. The Greek title, Paralipomena, meant something like the things omitted, which kind of suggests they were just supplemental notes to other histories.
Right, like footnotes almost.
Exactly. But the original Hebrew title, Direi Hayamim, translates more like the events of the days, which implies a full independent account. It was Jerome, way later in the 4th century AD, who first called them Chronicles. So the real insight here isn't just like a linguistic curiosity. It's that from its very conception, this book was meant to reframe history, not just repeat it. It offers this unique, hopeful lens for people who are really struggling to find their way back.
So the chronicler isn't just giving us a copy-paste version of history then. He's doing something much more intentional, almost like an ancient historian writing a theological manifesto.
Exactly. Think of the chronicler as an expert guide. He's interpreting history for his specific audience, the post-exilic Jewish community. I mean, imagine a people who had just come back home after decades of brutal exile. Their temple was destroyed, their land scarred, their identity was just shattered.
Yeah, they must have been asking some huge questions.
Profound questions. Are we still God's people? Does our past still matter? Is there any hope for our future? So the chronicler drafted his history with considerable literary skill. He built on Samuel Kings, yes, but he was interpreting, supplementing, even deleting material based on his own theological perspectives. His intention wasn't just to rewrite history for history's sake, but to provide lessons for the people of his time, drawing from their past to define their status, their legitimacy, and crucially to offer hope for their future. He focuses more on continuity and enduring principles, shaping the narrative to answer the pressing theological issues of his day. It's a purposeful narrative, definitely not just a chronological record.
Right, that makes sense. Now, for many people, myself included sometimes, the first 9 chapters of First Chronicles, those long lists of names, that's where they hit the wall. The begat chapters. It can feel like a valley of dry bones, as one source puts it, or maybe even just stupendously dull material. I remember reading it for the first time and thinking, is this just some kind of ancient biblical phone book? But you're saying it's much more profound than just a roster. Why would a book with such a profound purpose start with what seems like the most tedious reading imaginable?
That's an excellent question, and it's precisely where those aha moments really start to kick in. These genealogies, they're not merely dry lists. Their purpose is monumental to define status and legitimacy, especially for a community whose very identity felt fractured, right? The Hebrew people understood their place in the universe kind of like nesting dolls, from their immediate family out to their tribe, then the nation, then all of humanity, and ultimately connecting directly to God himself via creation, starting right back with Adam. These lists were their foundational documents. They told them not just who they were, but where they stood in God's grand story. It was about defining their entire worldview.
So these aren't just family trees, they're more like identity documents. A powerful testament to God's continuous work through generations. It's about belonging.
Precisely. For the chronicler's post-exilic community, these lists were absolutely vital. They legitimized the right to the land, their return, their faith itself. They substantiated the status of key Jerusalem families and, importantly, confirmed the Levitical families' inherited roles in the temple of their sacred service as priests, musicians, even the gatekeepers.
Ah, so ensuring the spiritual lifeblood of the community continued.
Exactly, according to God's design. And interestingly, these genealogies weren't just for spiritual purposes, they also served practical uses. Much like how other ancient societies used similar records for things like, land ownership or military conscription, they were vital records for the functioning of society, a concrete link to their past and their future.
That makes so much more sense. It really grounds their entire existence. And expanding on the richness of these genealogies, I noticed something else in our sources, a surprising openness, especially when you compare it to some of the stricter views from that post-exilic period, like Ezra's rigid separatism.
Yes. It's a beautiful counterpoint, isn't it? Despite Ezra's more exclusive stance, Chronicles shows remarkable respect for foreigners. We see an Ishmaelite recorded among David's in-laws, several foreigners listed among David's mighty men.
Really? I didn't remember that specifically.
Yeah, and an Egyptian slave married to a noblewoman in the Jerahmeelite clan, even aliens participating in Hezekiah's Passover celebration. This isn't just a side note. It really highlights that God's purposes embrace all types of people, including those in mixed marriages. It demonstrates a sweeping, inclusive vision of the community. The genealogies themselves, actually, in their brutal honesty, include the good, the bad, and the ugly, showing that everyone has a role in God's continuing activity. It's a reminder that God's plan is often bigger than our human expectations.
That's quite profound. And speaking of these lists, our sources also mention something about elasticity in these genealogies. Could you unpack what that means in practical terms and why it's important for understanding them?
Absolutely. What's truly insightful about this elasticity is how it broadens our understanding of identity. It means that terms like father could refer to any male ancestor, and son could mean any male descendant. They weren't always strictly biological lists.
So not necessarily direct parent-child.
Not always. They could be brief and fragmentary, maybe intended to legitimize or just commemorate facts that were already well known. They even included geographic and occupational names, reflecting communities identified by their location or maybe their craft guilds like linen workers or potters. So identity wasn't just about who your biological parents were. It was about your lineage, your community, your role, your connection to the larger story. Ultimately, they connected Adam to Noah, to Abraham, to Jacob, who is Israel, and through Judah straight to David, providing deep roots and a profound sense of continuity for the people of God, ensuring they understood their place in the grand narrative of salvation history. It shows that identities may be more fluid and inclusive than we often imagine, even in these ancient texts.
Okay, now let's turn to some of the most striking differences, where the chronicler's unique perspective really comes into focus, particularly in how he portrays King David. Chronicles covers some of the same ground as Samuel and Kings, obviously, but with noticeable variations. For instance, the omission of David's really scandalous past, his adultery with Bathsheba and the murder of her husband. It's a common misconception, I think, that the chronicler is just trying to scrub away David's dirty past. But what's truly going on here? Is it just PR?
That's a very common perception, yeah. But the sources offer a different, more nuanced interpretation. Scholars like Michael Heiser argue pretty convincingly that the chronicler isn't whitewashing David. I mean, everyone in that post-exilic audience would have known the full, unvarnished story from Samuel and Kings. Those scrolls were available.
Right, it wasn't a secret.
Not at all. Instead, he's being selectively interpretive. He's presenting, you could say, official portraits, designed to bring out the enduring theological principles behind David's greatness and God's covenant with him. His aim isn't to deny history, but to distill lessons from it. And the chronicler still highlights David's sins, just maybe in a different way. For example, by weaving elements of the Bathsheba narrative, the consequences of pride and disobedience, into that infamous census story in 1 Chronicles 21, which parallels 2 Samuel 24, he's reframing, not deleting, to emphasize different theological truths for his audience.
And that census story itself, it has that fascinating difference that's often puzzled readers. In one account, God incites David, and in Chronicles, it's Satan. How do we make sense of that creative reinterpretation? Does it alter our understanding of divine action or human responsibility?
It absolutely does, and it's quite profound. In 1 Chronicles 21.1, it states, Satan stood against Israel and incited David to number Israel. But 2 Samuel 24 says God incited him. The chronicler's version, using Satan without the definite article the, suggests an adversary or an accuser, rather than the proper name Satan, as we might think of it later.
Ah, so more like an adversary.
Precisely. This interprets the figure as a divinely appointed adversary opposing David, perhaps allowed by God to test him or bring about a necessary consequence. It's a really creative reinterpretation. It shows that David's sins, though framed differently, aren't suppressed. They're highlighted in a fresh way to teach lessons about faithfulness, the dangers of pride, and the serious consequences of disobedience.
So if I'm hearing you right, the chronicler is essentially saying that even when God might be using an outside force or allowing it, human choices still carry immense weight and consequence. That's a profound lesson on responsibility, even for kings.
That's a powerful way to put it, yes.
Yeah.
A demonstration of the chronicler's deliberate theological shaping.
And speaking of subtle choices, there's that curious detail about David's birth order. He's listed as the seventh son of Jesse in Chronicles, not the eighth, like in Samuel. Is that just a simple historical mistake, or is there maybe a deliberate theological point being made there too?
It seems unlikely to be just a simple mistake, given the chronicler's careful work elsewhere. This looks like another deliberate theological touch. David as the seventh son. Seven is a significant number, right?
Yeah.
It could represent him as a vehicle for God's sabbatical rest for his people.
Completion, perfection, rest.
Exactly. It hints at a deeper divine purpose, linking David to that concept of rest and completion, underscoring his favored, divinely appointed place in God's plan for Israel. It highlights his special, almost sacred role.
So with all these selective choices and reinterpretations, what's the chronicler's main message through David's reign, particularly for that post-exilic audience who were so desperately needing hope?
The overarching message is really David's pivotal role in establishing Israel's proper religious ritual, and crucially, his unwavering commitment to God's rule. David brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, right? That was a huge symbolic act, physically demonstrating his submission as king to the Lord, making Jerusalem the spiritual capital. His temporary, geographically limited reign was presented as a mere shadow, you could say, ultimately pointing towards God's eternal, universal kingship. And the promise to David about an everlasting dynasty, that wasn't exhausted by Solomon. It pointed forward to a future, true, and final king, a powerful hope for a Messiah who would ultimately bring God's eternal kingdom. This is the thread that resonates deeply, offering enduring hope.
And the temple plays a massive role in Chronicles too, doesn't it? Almost as significant as David himself. It seems to get much more detailed attention than in the books of Kings.
Absolutely. Chronicles emphasizes the personnel, the activities, the attitudes of worshipers in the temple far more than Kings does. The Levites especially are highlighted for their service, their vital role in praise and sacrifice. But the temple, for the chronicler, was always more than just a building. It was a witness to God's greatness, yes, but also a reminder that God cannot be limited by any structure made by human hands. It points beyond itself to an even greater reality. Ultimately, it anticipates that vision we see much later in Revelation of the New Jerusalem, where there is no temple because God himself is the temple.
Wow.
So it underscores God's unwavering commitment to fellowship with his people, secured eternally through sacrifice. It's a promise that transcends any physical building and speaks to a deeper, more personal connection with God.
Finally, let's talk about the chronicler's grand vision of all Israel and how God's justice and mercy sort of unfold throughout these books. What were the core messages he wanted his audience to grasp about their collective identity and destiny?
Well, the chronicler had this really sweeping vision of all Israel. He viewed both the northern and southern tribes as God's people, despite their tragic historical divisions. He stressed rebuilding the whole community. You see this in the inclusion of northern tribes like Ephraim and Manasseh in the post-exilic lists, and in Cyrus's invitation for whoever among you out of all his people to return. It speaks to unity and reconciliation, even after profound schism.
A message of hope for reunification.
Definitely. However, the chronicler also strongly emphasizes retribution theology alongside repentance. Israel's unfaithfulness, the Hebrew term is malal, which means like acting treacherously or betraying trust even among supposedly good kings, inevitably led to divine judgment and exile. But crucially, God always offered warnings through prophets, and a genuine heart of repentance could lessen judgment, leaving the way open for future hope and blessing. It wasn't just doom and gloom. We also see God's direct intervention, like when the text says the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of King Pul, that's Tiglath-Pileser III of Assyria, to execute judgment. God is ultimately the one who fights for his people, regardless of the odds, but their faithfulness and their response to his warnings ultimately determine their fate. It's this complex dance, between divine sovereignty and human responsibility.
This deep dive has really truly revealed the rich layers within Chronicles. It's so far from just being a dry history book. It's clearly a carefully crafted theological essay for a very specific audience, but with principles that absolutely resonate even today, reminding us of God's continuous, purposeful work.
Indeed. The chronicler reminds us that our identity isn't just rooted in our immediate circumstances, whatever they are, but in God's continuous work, stretching all the way from Adam through history to the present day. He defines legitimacy not by mere human achievement or circumstance, but by our place in God's grand, unfolding plan. He offers hope through faithful leadership, through true worship, culminating in that promise of an eternal king and an everlasting kingdom that will finally bring true rest and belonging.
So, what does this all mean for you, the listener? Maybe navigating a world that often feels fragmented and rootless, where past mistakes or current challenges can seem to define your entire future. Chronicles really challenges us to look beyond those immediate circumstances, doesn't it? To embrace a larger, continuous narrative of purpose and promise.
It really encourages us to consider, what are the deep roots you're drawing nourishment from, whether they are cultural, spiritual, familial. How do you perceive God's continuous work in your own story, in your community, and in the broader world? Even amidst challenges, perceived failures, or maybe historical baggage that feels heavy. The message of Chronicles is one of enduring promise, that God's plan for his people, for all Israel in the broadest sense, persists, and his ultimate kingdom will prevail, offering a final rest and belonging that no human dynasty or earthly temple could ever fully achieve. It's really an invitation to see continuity and profound hope in every single event of the days, recognizing that your story too is part of a much larger, purposeful narrative.